For the speaker announcements, we went outside, just to show you how beautiful our region is. Our first speaker is Pia from Open Collective. When I first saw her at the Zeit in Berlin, I thought we need her at our conference. And after some years of trying, it finally happens. This year, our keynote, Pia Mancini from Open Collective.
Hello everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I wish I was there with you, hiking and riding, but we're still not there yet. We're close, but not there. So today I want to talk to you about the economics of open source sustainability. First of all, hi, I'm Pia Mancini. I'm co-founder and CEO of Open Collective, Sustain, the Open Source Collective, all things Open Collective, really. Yeah, let's dive right into it. So, open source projects are obviously the building blocks of the vast majority of products, services, and digital infrastructure we use today. And as we all know, they're largely made today by unpaid communities. And I think this is a problem, and this is why. This is from XKCD, and it's been doing the rounds lately, but I still find it like so, clear and down to the point. So essentially, this is all modern infrastructure, and it's sustained by a project some random person in Nebraska has been thanklessly maintaining since 2003. So this is more or less where I think we are. And why we are here. So these are the attributes of open source. First of all, open source is a non-excludable public good. It means that it's not scarce. Once it's out there, there is no way of containing its use. You can't exclude people from using something that is open source. The second attribute of open source software is that it has nearly frictionless distribution, or very easy distribution, right, through packaging and dependency management. Third, there is no marginal cost for another person to use the code. There is no cost for the user. The code doesn't care. So another person using that code, downloading that package, has no impact. And lastly, it has asymmetry of information. Producers of open source have zero visibility of who is using the software. So this is creating the perfect storm. And I meant to put an image of a storm here, but it seems like it didn't make the cut. So picture the perfect storm. Open source is not free. Somebody else paid for it. Part of the problem that we have in open source is that the value that is created inside of communities is mostly captured outside those communities. But it doesn't mean that the fact that there is no marginal cost for using open source, or that there is no way to exclude someone, or that it's free or easy to access, doesn't mean that we are not exhausting any resource at all. The problem is that the resource that we're exhausting are the people and the communities that develop these projects. This is Dominic Tarr, who I don't know if you remember, you probably all do. He gave the keys to a project he was no longer maintaining, he was not interested in anymore. He had found better ways of doing and achieving what he wanted to. And so a contributor joined, he asked for the keys essentially to become a owner. And Dominic said, yes, great, sure, why not? I'm not using this anymore, not maintaining it. And this project was widely used by many, many apps. and the new owner injected malware on the package, producing great damage. And so Dominic got a lot of flake for this, and this is highly problematic because what he said, which I think is like right on point, he says a module is like a piece of digital property, a right that can be transferred, but you don't get any benefit from owning it, like being able to sell it or rent it. However, you still retain the responsibility, right? So you produce something, you put it out in the world, you have no path to get any tangible benefit in terms of like monetary benefit in general, or because of course you get other benefits, like, if you put out there a great piece of software that goes into your, standing in the community, companies will hire you because of that. So I'm not saying that there is no benefit at all, but you can't control what you benefit from, right? However, you always need to retain this responsibility for whatever you've put out there because people are using it. So again, Dominic, you put at risk millions of people, and making something for free but public means that you're responsible for the package, right? So we're in this situation where millions of apps or companies are using software that is created for free by maintainers, that they seem to be tied forever to the product or software that they put out there, because they have the responsibility of it forever, which is extremely unfair if you consider the fact that they're not getting paid for it and they're doing it in their free time. However, I am convinced that our digital commons is not doomed to be depleted. We can successfully manage it. I don't think it's a situation where this is the classic tragedy of the commons. It's more about how we manage these commons. So the first step in successfully managing the product is to acknowledge, the commons, is to understand that separating the code from the communities behind it is just plain silly. Code is the byproduct of a community of any size that exists in a certain environment and that it operates in a shifting landscape. So projects need to evolve, they need to adapt to this changing landscape, and that, my friends, needs people. Even forking a project, sure, you can fork a project, right? So you can, decouple the code by forking, but that still needs people. Someone needs to document, to move the community over to new pathways, communicate about this, etc. So, assuming that a code is just a code in the void, not connected to the people behind it, is not going to get us anywhere. So the first step is for us to acknowledge this. So this is, your classic supply and demand kind of graph. But so one of the ways that that you can drive up the value of something is by creating scarcity. And the problem that you have in with an ecosystem with the attributes that I described earlier is that if your creations are open and accessible, they're absolutely frictionless to distribute. You have no way of excluding folks from using it. There is no cost for the end user to use it. There's no cost for someone else to download the code. So how on earth do you create scarcity? So what is both scarce and in high demand in open source? And that is time and access. For example, what is difficult? If you think about something that is hard to build, to create, creating beauty is difficult. Whether it's tangible beauty of a brilliant innovation or the intangible essence of exceptional leadership, beauty exists in an elegant and novel approach to a problem. But in an industry like open source, like in our ecosystem, beauty abounds. Beauty is the end result of our creativity, of our collaboration, and that is immediately shared, replicated. It's a gift. When beauty is shared, then what is left, right, to be scarce? What can we use to create a sense of scarcity that then can create some sustainability? And that is the time of those with the knowledge. The time of those who created the beauty, who are able to help others enjoy these gifts that they've been putting out there. So how do you create, I forgot I had this slide here. How do you create scarcity? What is both scarce and in high demand? And that is maintainers' time and access, right? This is Mike Sherov. He was at Adobe at the time. And he says giving money to Webpack meant access to Sean Larkin, who was at the time, but this was a couple of years ago, co-maintainer to Webpack, and invaluable bundle optimization insights. Giving funding to Babel via employment of LeftPad meant he could launch preset environments which optimized our JS payloads. These weren't donations, these weren't patronage, this was investment, right? So Adobe invested in the open source software they used. It was free, yes, they could have used it for free, absolutely. Anyone was going to tell them anything? Absolutely not. Did they have the right license for it? Yes. What they didn't have was a direct line of communication to maintainers, talking to them, understanding when breaking points were going to come, what the roadmap was, how was the community going, what was the plan for the next year. All of that is invaluable information for companies, and that is why they should be investing in open source sustainability. So, if we can't regulate access to the code, can we regulate access to the people working on the code? Who will maintain the maintainers, essentially? So if the resource here that gets abused is maintainers' time, attention, and well-being. Maybe we're looking at this wrong. The question is not so much how is the source code protected via licensing, but how the people behind the source code are protected. Users are not free writing the code. The code is out there, is free, is accessible, there is no marginal cost to use it. What they're free writing is the maintainer's time and headspace. And that is the most valuable asset we have, because those are the people creating this beauty in the world. So this is one example. This is Fody. They put out there like a pretty radical idea. They said Fody requires significant effort to maintain. As such, it relies on financial contributions from the community and sponsorships to ensure its long-term viability. It is expected that all developers using Fody became a patron and open collective. And they went even further with this. They said that when raising an issue or a pull request, the GitHub ID may be checked to ensure that they are a patron and that the issue or pull request may be closed without further examination if they are not. Again, I understand this is radical, and I can virtually imagine all your eyebrows being, raised here, but I think this is a really interesting experiment. They have like a trust and honest system. They understand that they're PRs, that they're from community members, that they are still going to look at. They're just saying, do not think that because you can open an issue for free, we have to reply to it, right? So if an individual or an organization has no interest at all in the long-term sustainability of Fody, they can ignore this, right, and use something else. William Gross, I think, sums this up really well. Give away your code, not your time. So what is sustainability? For us, sustainability is about sustaining the community. Maintaining is causing or enable a condition or a state of affairs, this is by Safia Abdallah, to continue, that is maintaining, making something, to go on. But to sustain is to strengthen or support physically or mentally. And so sustainability refers to the resilience and the thriving of projects and the communities and individuals that surround them. And this community has a ton of community imbalances. Posting an issue has zero cost. Companies are hooked on open source. They're not going to start paying for code at this point in time. More people are extracting value from a repo than those maintaining it. Shared code, yes, but there is no shared responsibility. And it's very easy to start a project, but it's very difficult, as we see, to leave it, right? So these community imbalances are creating a pretty, an uneven scenario for communities in open source. Compounded to that, Nadia Iqbal put out a research at the time that shows that increasingly open source projects have fewer maintainers and more casual contributors. And this makes sense, right? Because it's more interesting to start something, put a nice feature out there, than doing the boring task of maintaining. I really like this. There is much more, but however, there's a lot more to a community than pushing patches. No sustainable community can be specific people. Individuals leave, move on for all sorts of reasons. And a project that depends on one person to be sustainable is a project in trouble. We've seen this in Heartbleed. We've seen this countless of times. So we need to figure out paths to make communities thrive. And how do we do this? How do we sustain our communities? So we need funding, right? That's number one thing we need. We need funding. So there are different models for funding open source. You have the corporate models like Red Hat, Open Core, the Linux Foundation kind of model. You can use crypto to avoid legacy system because open source are, projects that are distributed around the world. Most of them have no legal entity. We'll go more into that later. Open source as a public utility. Should we pay open source with our taxes in the same way that we paid for our roads or bridges? Or a decentralized community-shaped sustainability model, which is what Open Collective proposes. Corporate funding has a lot of pros and cons. Pros, obviously, is it's funding maintainers, it has active contributors, scalability. But cons is that it has a ton of government issues. You have the commercial versus community problem. If you have a lot of corporate funding, you have issues with focus as well, because you can have, a request from funders. It can be a threat to resilience and independence. So what we need are open industry standards. We need to have a standard because too quickly it can go to from, for example, opening an issue and the maintainers being able to say, okay, look, I don't work for you, so you can figure it out, and they can do something else, to feeling like answering every issue is required because someone is paying $5 an issue, right? So we need like a standardized business terms to avoid the explosion of a contractor complexity between companies and developers, right? Also, because someone is giving $100 a month or $500 a month, it doesn't mean that they can ask anything they want from a maintainer. So we need to work together in figuring out those standards. I'm just going to push a little bit quickly here because I'm just noticing the time. This is a corporate funding index that we created for open source grants. We want to see how much money companies are giving to open source, so there has to be transparency as well. What are the corporate incentives to invest in open source? Companies want to invest in open source because there's a name in the community, they have strategic influence on the roadmap, the open source stack health, hiring and retention, scaling of project, and as we said before, access. So we need infrastructure to support the community as well as the individual members of that community. And that is key. right? We need the community to thrive, the community to be sustainable. Evan from Vue.js says, today as the community grows, there are more and more contributions from the community, and Open Collective's transparent expense model can help us scale financial contributions beyond a single developer. So we're no longer in this case of supporting just one developer with a Patreon account or being hired by a company. We're talking about sustaining a community, making a community thrive, allowing a community to hire, maintain, retain different skill sets. And we're doing it from Open Collective. Open Collective, what it does is we support open source organizations, open source projects, and we interface with funders. So we make sure that project-directed funding can go straight into the hands of the maintainers. We are on a mission to make our communities sustainable. A couple of examples of things that we're doing. We just launched Fund OSS. Fund OSS is, we're very interesting. This is a community project, a collaboration of Sustain, Open Source Collective, Gitcoin, the Foundation, Open Collective Inc. We want to see if we can put a reward on community signaling. So we started a democratic funding matching fund project where individual members are giving funding to communities, and they're being matched with a quadratic funding mechanism that gives more money from the matching pool to those collectives that have more individual donations. We've also created Back Your Stack for a way for, again, this is a community project. This is not Open Collective anymore. We created it and we released it. Back Your Stack scans GitHub organizations, tell you which of your dependencies are seeking funding, and provides you a path, provides companies for a path to have a subscription to all their dependencies. Bounties is another example of things that projects are doing on Open Collective. Hipster.js is a really good example of using bounties to increase their community, to onboard new community members, to put like small bounties to help first-time pull requests. So, using funding to make your community thrive, to make your community more resilient, to invest in all the people. So give contributors a voice on the roadmap. Projects are using the funding to reach out to people with different skill sets, using funding to pay for the tasks that no one wants to do. They invest in face-to-face opportunity, and they acknowledge all contributions. So now that projects have project-directed funding, they manage their own budget in Open Collective, they have the opportunity to grow the different roles, invite folks with different skills to their projects. And in this way, they're not only reducing the buzz factor, but they're also making the community a lot more resilient and sustainable. So we need to come up with a model that distributes revenue, responsibilities, and earned social capital that takes into account different roles and supports different skill sets. So right now, those who make the code or those who make the initial code have a lot of take home a lot of the social capital that is created, and the community that stays sustaining that has less earned social capital. Especially roles like documentation, roles like onboarding, design get a lot less social capital from open source project, which means that they have less incentives to participate. And this is it, GitHub's survey from a couple of years ago, but the number one problem encountered in open source is incomplete or confused documentation. The second one is unresponsiveness. And then we have a lot of cultural issues as well with dismissive responses and conflict, obviously. But incomplete documentation is something that is so easy to solve once you have some budget. So things that make a project resilient and thriving and do not have to do with code. Documentation, support, community engagement and advocacy, community assets management. What can you do today? You can apply and accept, when possible, jobs at companies that give a portion of their profits to open source. If a company is a good open source citizen and you apply to work for them, tell them that that is the reason, because that makes a huge difference. If you can donate to open source, do it. If you have to charge $1 more per hour of consultancy, give that to open source. If you're a company, obviously invest in open source and talk to your managers. Ask them to contribute. Pressure works, and we need champions in every company. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. I hope that wasn't too rushed at the end. You'll find me at Pia Mancini in Twitter if you want to keep this conversation, or at SustainOSS, and obviously at Open Collect. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye.